Thank you everyone for joining us on this Future of Content Strategy webinar. We have a fantastic group of speakers for you today. So just to get us started, in terms of the agenda today, we're just going to start off with some quick house rules before meeting the experts. We then have 5 fantastic presentations for you all from our 4 speakers, with time at the end for a quick Q&A session. In terms of the house rules, the webinar is going to run for around an hour. We are streaming both on Zoom and YouTube. And as I said, there will be time at the end for a Q&A. In terms of submitting a question, if you're on Zoom, please open the chat window by clicking the Q&A button located at the bottom of your screen. For people on YouTube, please use the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen. If you have any questions after the webinar, you can reach us on Twitter using the hashtag ContentDuck, and feel free to tweet throughout the presentation using the hashtag. So our experts today, we have from CyberDuck, Todd. We have from Test Partners, Paul, who is the head of accessibility and digital inclusion there. We have our digital and content strategist from Scroll, Camilla West. And from Zest Digital, we have Laura, who is the head of client services there. So just a quick introduction into who we are at CyberDuck. Well, first, just to say we have been running for 15 years now. We just recently celebrated our birthday. In terms of what we do, well, we transform complex websites, content and applications. Over our 15 years, we've built up our own methodologies, undertaking in-depth data and technology auditing, some of which we're going to discuss with you today. We're very much proud of the work we do with our clients. One project, for instance, is Sport England. Todd's going to be picking up on this throughout his presentations. It's a project that involves large-scale content and audience auditing, going really in depth into building a kind of website built for the audience in mind. Another project that we worked on was College of Policing. This project involved a lot of work around usability, making sure that the product was easy for users to navigate, and really kind of creating a better user experience overall. So just in terms of getting us started, we really kind of just wanted to demystify what content strategy was. So simply put, your content strategy is what connects your business's content efforts with your goals and user needs. It's process, it's frameworks, it's the rules you follow in order to achieve what you want to achieve. So if you Google content strategy, I'm sure you'll find lots of different models out there. This is just one that we use. It starts with demystifying. So this is looking at who you are and where you are in the market, very much your brand identity and competitor positioning. We then go through to define, which is more about who you're trying to reach and why. And then design and develop, which is much more targeted around how you will achieve this. So today we'll be focusing on that define, design, develop stages. So just in terms of what is the future of content strategy, well, really, as we see it, the best content strategies aren't static. It's all about adapting to changes in technology, legislation, and society. It's about adopting new practices, tools and frameworks, and it's about planning, establishing a forward-looking approach. I think very much now, at the moment, lots of you are probably finding your business and your audience are in a moment of change because of the current pandemic. So what we always say is that when it comes to content strategy, it shouldn't just be an idea. It should be something that is put down on paper so that whenever you come to revisit it or wherever you do come across one of these changes, you're better positioned to adapt. So as I said, we have 5 fantastic presentations for you today. We'll be starting off with Todd around forming a content audience and UX audit. So Todd, would you like to start?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. I'm here to talk about user experience. I'll be talking about how to make sure the content you're creating is user-friendly. So my main question is, can your users, can your audience find what they're looking for? And there we go. Okay, yeah, so, and do you create your content with your users in mind? So your users want to quickly find the content they're looking for. They want to read it, complete the task, and they just want to go away. It's as simple as that. So as you'll see on the next slide, really what you need to do is you need to make your content delightful. So a big part of the future of content strategy is all about making your content delightful. But what does this mean? How do you make it a truly delightful experience? Well, there is a lot to think about. You need to think about making your content tailored, personalized, accessible. You need to make it inclusive, make it intuitive. You need to think about the purpose of your content. Are you using the right type of content? Quality over quantity is really important. And it needs to be engaging, timely, and relevant. You also need to know your numbers. You need to think about the data and you need to make sure you use it. And you also need to improve your UX. Doing all of this will result in not only in you reaching the goals of your organization, it will also future-proof your website. So as you see on the next slide, it's all about your content. It's all about carrying out an audit, content audit. So the first thing you need to do is have a look at the content you already have and carry out a content audit. So a content audit helps you make basically informed decisions. In a content audit, you assess every piece of content you have in your site. And it's going to show you what performs best. It's going to show you what needs repurposing and where the content gaps are. But before you can do this, you need to define your audience. You need to get to know them really well. And after you've got to know them, that's when you're going to be able to provide personalized content. And that's when you're going to be able to provide tailored experience. You also need to define your goals. But how do you do this? First thing you do is you need to talk to your stakeholders to start identifying which users to talk to. Then you need to interview your users. Talk to them. Find out what they want, find out who they are, why they're coming to your site, what are they doing there. And you need to identify your user needs. From this, then create your groups and your segmentations. Only after you've got a really good understanding of your audience and you know their needs, then you can do your content audit. Otherwise, a content audit will be a waste of time. But before I go and talk a little bit more about the content audit itself, it's worth mentioning and it's worth talking about personas and firmographic segmentations. Most of us are really familiar with personas. We know that we need them to get a really good understanding of the needs, desires, and frustrations of our users. But firmographic segmentation is also needed because what it does is it shifts the focus onto the organization itself. It shifts the focus to collecting and analyzing key information about the organization. So it's like, it's looking at things like industry type, size of the organization, and things like growth. So firmographic segmentation helps your organization segment potential B2B customers into meaningful segments. So for example, by having this segmentation, your organization is ready to use the right type of marketing. So marketeers, sales teams, if you have them, are now have meaningful groups to use. So now I'm going to talk about the content audit itself. So what you need to do is, as part of your content audit, first of all, start off by using a tool like Screaming Frog or URL Finder to scrape all the URLs on your website. And once you've done that, create a spreadsheet. So you can create a spreadsheet, obviously using Excel, Numbers, Notion, or Airtable. I recommend Airtable. So on the spreadsheet, you'll have the URLs. First thing you need to do is decide the importance of that page. Then think about the data and the numbers related to each one of those pages to find out how the page is performing. It is really important to decide the importance of the page based on your user research as well as the data. Simply because there might be pieces of content that are really important to your users, but they just can't find it. So on the next slide, I've got a really simplified version of a section of an audit that we did for Sport England. So this is for Sport England's old website. So as you can see, we've got the URL. We also have the analytics. We've got a content theme. So we've given it user story, obviously based on the user needs. For Sport England, we also had to decide whether the content was a statutory requirement or not. Decide which persona group it belongs to, and then think about the action for that page, whether we're keeping it, merging it, or improving it. And then obviously any recommendations that we had for that page. Obviously, I'm going to say again here that you remember you can't do any of this unless you know your users really well. And unless you also know your users' user needs really well. Also, don't forget that depending on the size of your website and the size of your organization, your content audit could potentially take you a long time. So be prepared to put the time, the effort, and the hard work into it. Or you can just get experts to come and do it for you. Yep, so as you can see on the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about the future of, well, I want to talk about Google Core Web Vitals. That's what I want to talk about, because essentially that is the future of search is the users. So as well as optimizing for keywords, you need to think about Google's Core Web Vitals. If anyone that's not familiar with this, it's the new ranking system that Google is using. They're using AI to emulate a user's perception of their website, focusing on user experience. So they're using metrics to assess page experience. So put in a really simple way, trying to make the web more delightful for the user. So just a little bit more context around this. So where did it start? So it all started with keyword stuffing. So the use and reuse keyword variations, where it was. Offsite SEO was really relevant, still is relevant. Keywords in important places, metadata, URLs, H1 tags, etc. So where is it now? The important part, the users matter more than ever. So focusing on creating high quality content with the right keywords should still be a priority, but don't neglect the user. Don't neglect things like how fast the page is loading. Think about the position of images on your page, and also making sure everything is very responsive. SEO needs to become a powerful tool in your content and your business strategy. Yep, in conclusion. So as a UXer on this talk, my conclusion and my recommendations are to first define your audience, think about personas and firmographic segmentations, then define the goals of your organization. Only after you've done this, audit your content. It's worth saying that if you have a big site or you're consolidating a few sites, to be prepared for this to be a big job, like I said earlier. But it is really valuable and worth doing. And obviously, I'm going to say that user experience is really important here as well. And you really can't have a content strategy without thinking about UX. Yep, so that's my part done. Passing it over to Laura to talk about SEO. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Laura from Zest Digital. We are an agency specialising in SEO and PPC. So today I'd like to talk to you about the basics of SEO and also the value of content. So we have and we will speak a lot today about content from a user's point of view, and I'd just like to touch on content from Google's point of view, which is actually quite similar. So I'm sure everyone in this call has heard that content is king, and there is no disputing that, but the only caveat to that is you have to have ticked a lot of other boxes. So first off, we're going to do SEO 101. So there are 3 core pillars to SEO, and I like to use the analogy of building a house to describe them. So first we have to lay our foundations, and that is the technical part of SEO. And that is looking at things like the structure and the hierarchy of your website, i.e. are the most important pages sat in the darkest depths of your URL structure? Is it fast? Does it work across different devices? So once you've got your foundations nice and stable, you then need to look at building your walls. And that is the on-page part of SEO. And that's all around content. Now, that isn't necessarily just content that you can see with your eyes. It's a lot of stuff that's going on behind the scenes. So things like schema markup or meta descriptions or image alt tags, which Paul will actually touch on later as well in our accessibility section. Then once we've built our walls, we need to put the roof on the house, and that is your off-page optimization. And this is the authority that is seen for your website elsewhere. So that's things like links to your website or maybe social mentions. So obviously today is all around content, so we are going to focus on the on-page elements. So a little scenario for you. You go onto Google and you type in content marketing. I thought it was topical because of today. Now, the website that is up at the top of the search results is not there by accident unless they're seriously lucky. The likelihood is that they have completed keyword research and they have made a conscious decision to rank for that particular term. So today I'm going to show you the quickest ever run through of doing keyword research. So you're going to need some tools to do this. To name a couple to you, SEMrush, Ahrefs, Moz, or Google Keyword Planner, which is what we're going to be using today. So when you go into Google Keyword Planner, you would click on Discover New Keywords, and it would take you to the kind of screenshot overlay here. Now, what I've done is I've typed in content marketing. You can see that you can add multiple keywords here if you've got lots of ideas, but also if you've got no ideas whatsoever and you've got no idea where to start, you can actually just use a domain as well, and it will generate ideas for you off the back of that. And then we click on Get Results. And then we're going to be taken to the results screen. So some pointers here for you. So up at the top in your settings, be really careful here. So for instance, your location, is that where your target audience is? For the date range, have you got enough of the date range to allow for things such as seasonality or maybe a global pandemic? And then you will also see that you can broaden your search. So this is where you will find closely related keywords that you could add to generate more keyword ideas. And then down in the bottom left, you've got all of those keyword ideas. I've screenshotted this quite heavily, but there's actually over 800 suggestions that it's given us off the back of just typing in content marketing alone. Then you will see the average number of monthly searches. Now, one thing I would say here is don't always go for the biggest one. Biggest isn't always best, and I'll explain why in a moment. And then you'll also see a little seasonality graph as well. And then finally, the competitive nature of that keyword. So the couple of top tips that I've got for you here is to really think about the intent of the keyword, but also think about the particular content piece that's going to target these keywords. Where does it sit within the funnel? Is it a content piece to build awareness? Is it to convert users? Is it to retain customers or bring back repeat custom? Now, there are so many more steps that you would do as part of keyword research that sadly we don't have time to cover today. But a couple of tips would be to do analysis of the search results for that keyword, find out who the competition is, find out can you beat them, but also as well, that will give you a really good indicator of the type of content that ranks highly for those terms as well. So we've done all of our keyword research. So I told you that we were also going to talk about value today. So that's our next bit. So how do we measure the value of content? And there are numerous KPIs that we could use. And again, it comes down to the purpose of the content. Is it for awareness, engagement, generation of leads and revenue, or is it for customer retention? Now, I'm going to focus on the juiciest one today, and that is leads and revenue. I often hear that you can't tie return on investment to content, and I don't believe that's true, and I'd like to prove that to you today. So first, we need to look and understand our key metrics and our baselines. Next slide, please, Dan. Thank you. So first up, we are looking at this from a brochure website perspective. What I mean by that is this particular website does not have the ability to purchase online. So to find our key metrics, we're going to go into Google Analytics. And first, we're going to look for the average number of sessions per month. That can be found within the audience section. I would recommend that you take it over a 12-month period, because that's going to allow for things such as seasonality. Then we need to know the number of leads, and assuming that you are conversion tracking on your website, which I really hope you are, it will be found within the conversion section of analytics under the overview, where you'll also see your website to lead conversion rate. Finally, these figures you're not necessarily going to find through analytics, I'm afraid, but we need to know of those leads that you get through your website, how many sales do you make? And that is going to give you your lead to sale conversion rate. And then finally, your average order or lifetime value. Now, I appreciate that's quite a lot to take in, so we're just going to run through a really quick example now. So, average number of sessions per month, 10,000. Of those 10,000 users, you deliver about 200 leads, which gives us a website to lead conversion rate of 2%. Of those 200 leads, this imaginary business typically generates about 25 sales per month, which gives us a lead to sale conversion rate of 12.5%. And this business, generally speaking, gets about £25,000 in revenue through those 25 sales, which gives us our average order value of £1,000. Now, it is worth noting at this point, your business might record other metrics such as marketing qualified leads, sale qualified leads. That's absolutely fine. You need to add them into the funnel. So now we've got all of our key metrics, we need to know our goals. We need to know where we want to get to. So again, dependent on the purpose of the content, it could be that you want to increase your engagement by 50%, but because we're talking about return on investment today, we're going to look at increasing our revenue by 50%. So using the example that we just went through, we know that they currently generate £25,000 in revenue. So if we want to increase that by 50%, we're looking for another £12,500, so a total of £37,500. Now, how do we go about that? So there are lots of different metrics within this funnel that we could look to manipulate and improve to gain that 50% additional revenue. That could be, for instance, we look to improve the website to lead conversion rate by 50%. If we got that to 3%, we know that would generate the revenue. But because we're talking about content today, and typically speaking, content will drive traffic to your website, we're going to go right back up to the top of the funnel, and we're going to try to increase the average number of sessions per month by 50%. So we are looking for an additional 5,000 users per month to achieve our revenue goal. So how do we go about that is the obvious next question. So we have something that we like to refer to as our search engine ranking position calculator. Now, this is just a little spreadsheet that has lots of formulas that sit behind it. Now, you remember earlier, we did some keyword research, and off the back of that, we're going to pretend that we got 10 fantastic keywords that we're really keen to target, and we've popped them into column B. Then in column C, we've detailed their search volume that Keyword Planner gave us. And then you will see in columns D to H, the percentage of traffic that you could expect to see if you ranked in a certain position. So for example, Keyword 1, if you ranked in position number 2, you would expect to receive about 16.5% of the total search volume, i.e. 165 visitors. Then here's one I made earlier idea, I've highlighted a number of target positions, and unsurprisingly, if we got all of those keywords ranking in all of those target positions, we would yield the additional 5,000 users that we need to hit our revenue targets. So on to one of the final sums that I promised we are doing today, and that is all about return on investment. So how do we work that out? Actually, it's a really simple sum. It's simply revenue generated divided by the investment. So we know that the revenue generated is going to be £12,500 if we get those 5,000 sessions and all of our other metrics remain. Now, if it costs £5,000 to deliver that strategy, we're basically saying that for every pound that we invest, we're going to get £2.50 back. If it only costs £1,000, that means that for every pound invested, you get £12.50 back, which sounds a lot more appealing. The only caveat to this is profit margins. Obviously, these vary dramatically between businesses, so do keep that in mind when you're going through these sums. So one of the last points that I would like to make is that this is a never-ending cycle. Once you have identified your KPIs and you have found a method to record them, you then need to be evaluating them. Are you on track to hitting your KPIs? If you're not, why are you not? What do you need to change? If you are, absolutely fantastic, but what could you do to improve them even further? Then once you've done that, you need to reevaluate, change, so on and so forth. So in conclusion, my couple of take homes for you off the back of this is that the value of content can be measured. The question is, what are you measuring, and make sure that you do measure it. Secondly, is that every business is responsible to know their metrics and use them. And if you're working with agencies, make sure you give it to them too. And then finally, for any of the SEO people on this call probably having a heart attack right now for me not saying this, keyword ranking does take time and it does take patience. It is not an overnight fix. So thank you very much for listening to me. I'm now going to hand over to Paul from Test Partners, who's going to talk to us all about accessibility.
Afternoon, everyone. So I'm Paul from Test Partners. We're a software testing company specializing in functionality, compatibility, and of course, accessibility. Next slide, please, Dan. Thank you. So first of all, what is accessibility? Now, I once asked someone at a conference, is your website accessible? To which the answer was, yes, you can find it really easily in Google. That's not what this is. That's what Laura was talking about. So accessibility is all about making sure that your digital content is can be read and understand, and all the links and buttons and functionality is operable for people who have digital accessibility needs, whether that's mental or physical. So at the more profound end of the scale, some people with accessibility needs have special software to help them to use computers. So if you're blind or partially sighted, you might use a screen reader, which turns content into audio. If you have dyslexia, or if you have a more profound physical disability, then you might use voice recognition software that allows you to talk to your computer. So you can say, scroll up, scroll down, click this, click that. And that's quite interesting, because in some ways that is the not in some ways, that is the technology behind more mainstream products such as Siri and smart speakers. And I'll come back to that in a second. So that's really what we mean by digital accessibility in this section. So why should that concern you? Why is that something that you need to start thinking about if you aren't already? Well, one reason is for business reasons. So again, we'll look at the figures shortly, but an awful lot of people have profound accessibility needs. It's estimated that around 20%, or 1 in 5, has an accessibility need of some shape or other. If you also think about the fact that we're an aging population in the UK, and those of us who are no longer 30 have long age-related long-sightedness and a slight decrease in hand-eye coordination and things like that. And you suddenly start to realize that we have accessibility needs as well. Maybe not as profound as some people, but we still have things that need to be taken into consideration. And then again, you might also think of situational impairments. So again, returning to the smart speaker thing, imagine that you've been out shopping and you come back and you use your elbow to open the front door. You might say, Siri, turn on the lights. And in that moment, you have an accessibility need that assistive technology is addressing. So those are all good, solid reasons to think about accessibility for your digital products, because it affects us all. Secondly, a bit more stick than carrot, there are legal reasons. So if you're a company or organization based in the UK, the Equality Act of 2010 means that you have to make reasonable adjustments to your website so that everybody can use it. If you work in the public sector, the Public Sector Act of 2018, something you probably know about, but that came into effect for search engines last September and for apps in June. So those are legal reasons why you should be thinking about accessibility. And lastly, you should be thinking about accessibility because it's the right thing to do. Everyone should be able to use your website or buy your products. And you should want everyone to be able to use your website and buy your products. Chances are you wouldn't accept it if it wasn't possible to use your website on an Apple. You know, if you got a message saying this website doesn't support Safari, you would be unhappy. And it's just the same sort of thing here. As you can see from the next slide, the numbers also support why it's a very important thing to take on board and start dealing with it. So worldwide, we're looking at up to 2 billion people with a disability. And as I said, that's roughly 20%. If that sounds very high, then it's because you're probably not taking on board and thinking about what we call hidden disabilities. So in the UK, it's estimated that around 10% of the population has dyslexia. That's not something you can see when you pass a person in the street, but it does have an impact on how they use your digital products. Next slide, please, Dan. So hopefully I've convinced you with the case of why you should be thinking about accessibility. You might well be thinking, how do I go about doing this? Well, the first thing to consider is that accessibility can be very complicated. Some of it, as I'll show you later on, can be very easy, but it can get very complicated very quickly. And asking a member of your team to spend a couple of afternoons researching it and getting up to speed isn't going to cut the mustard. We see lots of examples where people think they can do it in-house with no training and do what they think is the right thing, but because they don't have that knowledge, can actually make things worse than if they'd done nothing at all. So it's important to either work with people that know about accessibility or to recruit people who understand about accessibility. The second thing to think about is that you should make accessibility a core part of your business. Now, when people first encounter accessibility, it can often be seen as a bit of a problem because they're trying to do it at the tail end of the process. A week before launching their new website, they think they should get an audit done, and then it just creates problems. If it's part of your everyday process, so that people are thinking about it, as they create new functionality for a website, or even as they write content for the website, then it becomes part of the everyday process and second nature, and much easier to deal with. And the third thing that I would recommend thinking about is that there's some really good stuff out there that people have already developed. Organizations like Government Digital Service have spent an awful lot of time and money and effort into researching components and design patterns and testing them with actual people, and then publishing what works. So rather than trying to reinvent the wheel with a blank sheet of paper, why not borrow some of that expertise that people have already put together? Okay, so it's worth also thinking about how accessibility features in the life cycle of a product. It's a bit of a buzzword, but shifting left has become a hot topic in all kinds of testing, but it's very important for accessibility testing as well. Todd's going to speak about wireframing a little bit later on, but if you're thinking about accessibility at the wireframing or creative design stage, you're already working out how to build that functionality with accessibility in mind. And that leads to not only better solutions than trying to bolt something on at the end, but it tends to lead to fewer iterations of fixing, testing. So it makes the process a bit cheaper and more efficient. So when you start building your new digital products, the way to do it is to build your template pages and components that will feature on throughout a website, and test those in isolation initially, and once you're happy, and then build the pages and test how they integrate together and how well they play together. Once you've got your framework established, you know that your main navigation is fine and it will be fine on all the pages. And you start adding the content to those web pages ready to be uploaded and published. That's when you can start rolling out the automated tools. Now, a quick word about automation. They're very good for testing lots of pages, but they can only reliably test a subset of all the tests that need to be done. So give you an example, they can look at an image on a page and say, yes, there's a text alternative, but they cannot tell you how accurate that text alternative is. So if you had a picture of a dog and it was described as being a cat, that would pass your automated tool test. One day AI will maybe help bridge that gap, but for the moment it needs human interaction and evaluation to determine lots of checkpoints. So automation is not yet ready to replace people like me, but it can be a useful tool after the manual auditing has been done. I think the other thing that's very important to take on board is that this is not a one-off process. If you build your website and you do all the right things, and on the day of launch, you meet the success criterion, and your website is judged to be accessible, that doesn't mean it will be accessible tomorrow. As soon as you start changing it and adding new functionality or even new content, you're in danger of bringing in new issues. So you have to stay on top by monitoring, but also doing things like training and making sure that even your content editors have a good understanding of what they can do to make website and web content more accessible for everyone. Next slide, please, Dan. So if you're sitting there watching me drone on about this and you're wondering whether you've got an accessibility problem or not, there are 5 simple tests that you can do yourself with no technical knowledge whatsoever. And you can carry these out just quickly to see if there's any issues there. What I would say is, if you do try this and you don't discover any problems in those 5 tests, it doesn't mean your website is fully accessible. It just means you've met these tests. So the first one is, can you navigate your website using just the keyboard? You can move around by using the tab key, and if you want to move back up the page, you can press Shift Tab. If you want to activate buttons or links, you can press Return. If there are elements on your page that you can't tab to or can't activate using the Return key, then you've got a problem. As you can see on this slide, it's always worth checking for unique page titles that describe the content of the page. And this is one of those accessibility issues that ties in a little bit with what Laura was saying. If you've got the foundations in place, then your website will perform a bit better in the search engines, but it also helps accessibility as well. So having unique page titles and descriptive, keyword-rich headings, it's good for everyone. So one way that you can check your page titles is just to, when it's in the browser, just to move your mouse over the tab, and you'll get a little pop-up which will show you what the title is. And if it describes the page, then great. So if you've got forms on your website, it's useful to check, well, you can check 2 things here actually. You can check that there are text labels for the input elements that accurately describe what the user is expected to enter. And then if the user does make a mistake, does the feedback that they get actually help them to fix the problem? So you can see in the bottom form there, errors are only indicated by change of background color. It gives the user no help whatsoever in fixing those problems. And if you have low vision or no vision, you're getting no feedback at all, because you might not be able to perceive the changing colors. Another quick test you can do is, if your website has video, you can check to see if it's subtitled. But as quick as it gets. One thing I'll just, going slightly off topic, one thing I will say is, one of the myths around accessibility is that it means your website has to be boring and dull and you can't do things like video. But that's not true. You can have video, as long as you have captions and maybe a transcript or audio description. And actually, for some user groups, like people with dyslexia, they would rather listen to 2 or 3 minutes of video than read an 800-page article. So that's something to think about as well. And as you can see here, even the clangers have got subtitles. So if they can do it, we can all do it. And then lastly, again, this ties back a little bit into what Laura was saying. Are your links descriptive? Do they tell you where they're going to take you, or are they endless streams of read more and click here? Having keywords in there is good for users and good for Google. And also, are they easy to see? So the screenshot shows a government website with a high contrast style sheet applied to it. It's essentially made the page black and white, but I can still see the links because they're underlined. If they weren't underlined and just relied on color, they would be virtually invisible and I wouldn't know that the links were there. So those are 5 quick tests that you can run yourself. Good luck, everyone. If you'd like to know more about accessibility, then I've put together a short list of links to get you started. The first one is an introduction to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, and it's written more or less in plain English, and I would strongly encourage you to try that. Mills is going to talk a little bit about readability, which is perhaps one of the biggest barriers in website accessibility of all, because a lot of people have a relatively low reading age, and it's thought that maybe even 7 million adults in the UK are functionally illiterate. So it's always good to pitch your content at the widest possible audience by lowering the reading age. If you don't believe me, try diving straight into the official accessibility guidelines, because they are hundreds of pages of very technical content that is very difficult to read, ironically. I mentioned that there are various accessible design patterns out there that are free to use. One of those is the GDS design pattern, so I'd encourage you to go and have a look at that. If you've got the bug and you're interested in doing yet further reviews of your website, then there are a list of easy checks that you can perform that build on the 5 that I've just shown you. And then lastly, if you don't fancy any of that and just want to talk to some experts, then there's a link to our website, and please do get in touch. And with that, I'll hand you back to Todd.
Thanks, Paul. Hi, everyone, it's me again. Right, moving into the design and develop part of our talk. So, a future-proof method to structuring content. After you've defined your audience and after you've carried out your audits and you've made sure that you're fully in the know with SEO and accessibility, then you start thinking about developing your information architecture. So again, it needs to be intuitive. Again, it needs to be tailored for users. You need to keep it simple. Think about the copy. If you have a large site or if you are consolidating a handful of sites, then defining your information architecture needs to be an iterative process. So come up with your first draft, test it, and iterate it again. So you'll see on the next slide, once you've done the first draft of your sitemap, you need to start mapping it to the new. Once you've done the first draft of your sitemap, start mapping it to the new one. So first start by creating the new content you need. And then my advice again is to create a spreadsheet. And on that spreadsheet, have a page for each section of the new sitemap. You need to give each new site on a new sitemap a title. You might also need to think about a title for your content. Write a user story. Make sure it's based on user needs. Decide if the page or the section needs new content written. The important thing here is to think about not only text content, but also start thinking about other forms of content. For example, visual content like videos, audios, podcasts, infographics, images. Start thinking about things like case studies. Do you need a case study to support the content that's on that page? Also need to think about making your content engaging and fun. And if you're lucky enough to be in a position to start thinking about things like making the content interactive, augmented reality, 3D images, 3D videos, then you're in a really good position. As you'll see on the next slide, here's another simplified version of the content mapping document we created for Sport England. So you'll see that we've got, so this is for one of the pages on the new website. So this is for the funding page. So you'll see we started with having the content title. So that's the name of the section on that page. So for this example is funding, like I said. We've got the user stories. You'll notice there's a number of user stories attached to this page. And then we decided if we needed new content for it. or where the content was potentially coming from the old website. And that was pretty much it. So we did this for every single section or page for the new website, so for the new sitemap that we put together. So after you've decided on your content, you need to start thinking about wireframing. So as you'll see on the next slide, a couple of things to think about, to remember about wireframing. So first thing, you need to write your content, you need to create it, then start wireframing. We can no longer wireframe without any real content. And you have to remember the basics here as well. So things like page hierarchy, page title, headings, subheadings, thinking about reading behavior, readability, and also think about what else does a page need. Do you need to think about maybe SI navigation, anchor links, accordions? So what else will the page need to make it user-friendly? So Paul talks about accessibility, mentioned wireframing. So wireframing with accessibility in mind is crucial. SEO as well, so Laura talked about SEO. So at this point, you do need to be thinking about SEO as well. After you have done your first set of wireframes, it's good to start thinking about the whole process. This is especially important if you've got a big site. And again, if you have multiple sites that you're consolidating into one. So the process needs to be done in sprints using the agile methodology. You do need to first do your content audit before you start your sprints. Then use the user stories that you've written to split your sprints. So in each sprint, work on information architecture first, and then create your content, and then wireframe it. Test it, and then decide where it's going on your website. Again, make sure that your learnings from accessibility and SEO both are kept at the forefront of every stage and every sprint. And then migration, so migrating any content that you need to the new website, that will come after you've done all your sprints. So the next thing I want to talk about is content management systems. What CMS are you using? So this is really, really important. Most content management systems now offer automation, they offer personalization, they offer insights. So all of this is really, really important. You do need to think about what CMS is the right one for you. So you need the right CMS for your needs. Content management systems can empower you and your team with more specialization, personalization, and automation. Content migration, like I said, is something that you also need to think about. You do need to plan it really carefully. And you do need to, and don't forget that every migration is different. It is also worth mentioning that content, not all your content can be migrated automatically. Some will have to be done manually. So that's something you need to be aware of. We have a really super talented bunch of tech people at CyberDuck. They're the experts, so if you have any questions, you can always ask them about it. I'm just going to then finish by telling you a few conclusions from the UX on the talk. So, define your users, get to know them really well, audit your content, then create your new content. Your content needs to carry the right messaging to the right user. It needs to be engaging, timely, and relevant. So make it intuitive, make it tailored, accessible, and above all, make it delightful. And that's it from me. So I'm now going to pass it on to Camilla, who's going to be talking about your publishing strategy. Thanks.
Hi there, everyone. Hi, so I'm a content strategist for an agency called Scroll, and we deliver content strategy, design and training to organisations across the UK, both public and private sector. Now, I'm going to be talking today about website content strategy, so content for service design, product design, content migration, rather than social media or marketing content, but of course there are overlaps. And when I'm talking about a content strategy, for me, it's the overarching principles of how content is created, published and retired, and more importantly, how it ties into your organization or business's aims. And I'm not going to preach about high quality writing and content design, although I will touch on a little bit of that with tone and brand. But this is about putting a strategy in place that has measurable benefit to your organization or business. So moving on, firstly, we need to think about the content you are creating. Now, depending on how big or complex your organization is, the person responsible for website content might be part of marketing, comms, standalone digital team. If you're in government, they might be part of DDAT, digital data and technology. And so they put the content up while it still goes through marketing or comms and potentially policy. And not all content serves the same purpose. So looking at those different types of content, as mentioned by Todd, the content on your website serves different purposes and needs to be delightful and engaging. But what does delightful and engaging mean? So a fascinating piece of long form thought leadership content you might use for, say, marketing collateral to show your expertise, that might be delightful. Sometimes you need content that leads you through a process quickly, succinctly. Sometimes your users might be delighted just by you giving them an easy to fill in form. So then your personas help you put that content into buckets, again, as Todd was saying, and then your user journeys refine that and your user needs take you beyond that. So what are the users trying to do with that content? What's the journey they went on to get from offline to this content? Can they find it? Did they search for it? Thinking about Laura's presentation on keywords, did they navigate to it? Did they come via marketing or social? But more importantly, do they even know you exist or the content exists? So are you creating content because you want to tell people something, not because they need it? People are busy and this rarely works. It's not Field of Dreams. There's no type it and they will come. It's one of the biggest errors organizations make. So now let's say your user has got to your content. Awesome. Does it allow them to complete the task they came to do? And how do we know they've done it? So what's the acceptance criteria? Do they buy the product, sign up to the newsletter, find the needed contact details, etc.? A huge amount of content, again, doesn't do this. It's a wasted effort and wasted time on the part of you, the creator, or your subject matter experts. So if a piece of content doesn't serve a user need and allow that user need to be completed, I would argue, bin it, be brutal, do not migrate it, do not create it. Leads into your business KPIs. Once your user has gone through the content, done the thing, can you assign that completed task to feed into a business KPI? So is there some way you measure your service, your product, your ROI, your marketing sign up? Did creating that content waste your time? Because I would argue if it doesn't go into a KPI, it shouldn't exist. And this splits for me the difference between editorial and publishing. Now, I think editorial is quite an old-fashioned way of looking like newsprinting. And some of your content will be editorial, but ultimately most of it should be part of a publishing strategy. So this is where you've got your different types of content, particularly if you're migrating large amounts of it. Who owns it? Does changing it impact their workflow? Have you made your company more efficient but removed a chunk of somebody else's job? Are you publishing it for legal reasons, say your FOI publication scheme, T's and C's? Your editorial strategy is more likely to be time-specific and news-driven, social media-driven. So think about what types of content are campaign-driven versus what needs to be permanent. And don't create web content for specific events on the site unless it's going to be in that non-permanent editorial world. Otherwise, it gets left to die. Moving on to our next bit, and apologies, I do realize we're about to run over time here, so many apologies, I will speed through. So moving on to the creation of content. So the next slide, please. Anyone can write, yeah? So how many times has anyone who's on this call who's been in content or marketing or comms heard this? Not a skill, anyone can do it. And if you're working on a website or worse, an internet, this is also where senior stakeholders really start to put their oar in, because they understand what writing is. Note, they don't necessarily understand what good writing is, but they have a mental model of what they think should be on the site. It's a bit similar to if you design something and it's had a whole load of complex process go behind it, and then someone says, don't like that blue. It's purely because it's something they can impact. Use your stakeholders aren't able to do the technological development, for example, but they can change the words. We can use this to our advantage, and I'll show you how. So because most people believe anyone can write, and it's often left to non-writing experts, there can be an arduous sign-off process, or it's just not written very well. And for the vast majority of websites, the written word is either integral to, as important as, or if you think about GovUK content that's all words, more important than other parts of the user experience. So treat the design of your written word and how they appear to the user with the same effort that you would treat any other UX, information architecture, or design. Just because your stakeholders think anyone can write doesn't mean anyone should be writing your web content. Reiterating some of what Todd said in the last section, user research, embed your content user research within other user research. Don't do it separately. Create those user needs, user stories, acceptance criteria, and the GovUK guidance on this is excellent. Similarly to what Paul was saying about using patterns for design, the content design patterns that you use, you can use common ones across many different websites and different industries, or you can use common ones within your website. This gets users to recognize and they get a mental model of what you're trying to do. So just working with a client at the moment that has 150 or so courses written by multiple parts of the business, we've created a content type so that each course looks exactly the same and is structured similarly. Your user sees it and goes, oh, I'm reading a course. And lastly, I'd love a world where you could test content twice before publishing. It's not going to happen. We're not there yet. But see if you can test it. If in doubt, test it out. You may well have brand guidelines or tone of voice, and it's mandated by your organization, but watch this one. Obviously, it's about the mental model your users have of you, and they want you to be recognizable in how you're seen, but don't let it get in the way of user needs. A good example is Innocent Smoothie. So they obviously have a very specific tone of voice and brand. However, some of the content on their website doesn't work as a result of it. So they have an area that says, if you want to call us, ring the banana phone. That's great, very amusing. But if English is not your first language, or if you don't have a high level of reading skills, this is just nonsense. And I will briefly touch on readability as part of accessibility. As Paul said before, around 10% of the UK population is dyslexic, and reading ages are much lower than you think. If you have poor content, you are failing them. There's a whole load of stuff you can do around that. I won't go into it now in the interest of time, but in terms of complexity of language, the reading age of the Times and the Sunday Times is age 12 to 14. So many websites I've worked on, their reading age is up at the level of the Harvard Law Review. And if you're writing for experts, that's not an excuse. Experts have actually said that they want more plain English because they have more to read. So don't be fooled into thinking, oh, but we're writing for experts. It doesn't need to be like that. And then moving on. So how does the content strategy, sorry, I lost my slide. So how does the content strategy, a medium, long term, help you? So it helps you become part of a professional function in a business or organization like HR or finance or procurement, and it gives you more power and more decision-making weight. Showing how that happens on the next slide. In an ideal world, I said it before, if you don't have a content user need and an attached KPI, don't publish it. Make that part of your content strategy if you can. You can also use content strategies to bridge the gap between digital and non-digital people in your organization and find common ground, because non-digital people have that understanding of content. You can use it to explain user needs and acceptance criteria. You can then embed some of the digital tools and frameworks into other parts of their job, like service design. So if any of you are in government, you'll know that there's a lot more focus on user-centered policy design now, which has taken some of those originally digital frameworks and tools and moved it into a way of working. Having your clear content strategy gives a level of confidence, so it doesn't confuse customers or service users, doesn't create more calls, make you less efficient. It can also remove legal risks and give you confidence that if there was a crisis, you'd know where the content you needed was, who put it there, and if they followed the correct process for publication. And if you're in a regulated industry with auditing of one type or another, this is a massive help to you. Could potentially save you if things hit the fan at some point, because you've got easy to find content and a good knowledge management audit trail, sorry. All of this can give you your users confidence and your stakeholders confidence. So what's the future for content? Well, the future's bright, and on the next slide, The future is doing the dull things really well. That's simple. Content operations, the practical things. More digitally mature organizations increasingly actually have a content ops team or as a discrete team or person as the backbone of their strategy. Again, it's professionalizing this process. Think about procurement or expenses in where you work. And if you're trying to buy something, do you want to use a commercial provider? Follow this process. Want to spend more than, say, 10K? Follow these rules. It's not movable guidelines, it's the way we work. That's your content operations and your content strategy. If you are telling people what they can and cannot publish, telling them why, and getting your content operations to maintain the governance, it makes copywriting, content types, design patterns all part of the rules. Images, brand assets protecting you from copyright issues, get them into the rules and regulations and get it down in a content operations manual. Similarly, report on the quality of content and how it's used. Get the content ops reporting embedded in your processes, not just clicks and hits, but look for those KPIs and ways to measure. And ultimately, embed content operations into your strategy, get it signed off up on high, and get this to make content a professional function that helps serve your customers in a delightful way, your users, and delivers your business and organizational needs. And just to finish off, I've got a few links here, useful links that you might find. So as Paul mentioned before, the government stuff, the GDS stuff, it is great. Writing well for users, how to write user needs, making your writing accessible. There's tons of stuff in there. From the readability section, I would use Hemingway, which is quite a good checker. And then there's an organization, well, a company called The Writer, who I've worked with in the past. They have an excellent one, which gives you a grade like BBC level. But if you need a bit more help than that and you're looking for strategy or content training, then do feel free to get in touch with us at Scroll. And I will hand back now.
Just some quick takeaways from the talk itself. So as we said, don't underestimate the importance of audience research and content auditing. Create KPIs that allow you to measure the true value of content. Put in that extra effort to create universally accessible and inclusive content. Content structure is just as important as the content or copy itself. And as Mill said at the end, doing the dull things well frees up time for the more exciting activity. There are many tools out there. Here's just a quick snapshot of some. If you want any more information on building your own toolkit or identifying the right collaboration or composing, blogging, CMS, automation and personalization tools, please don't hesitate to outreach. So if anyone is with us, anyone wants to just outreach us at any point, please do hit us up at email. We are hello@cyber-dark.co.uk. You can reach us also on Twitter. We are at cyberdark_UK. And lastly, you can get us on LinkedIn, company/cyber-duck. As I said, you can also use the hashtag #ContentDuck tweet anytime you want, and we'll be able to get back to you there as well. Otherwise, thank you again to Camilla, Todd, Laura, and Paul for joining us today. And thank you all for watching our webinar, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thank you and bye.